Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled to find more peace in your life, then do we have the How to Survive Childhood Now That You're an Adult show for you. Today I'll be talking with Ira Israel, counselor, psychotherapist, screenwriter, and the author of a beautiful new in-depth book on owning your life, How to Survive Childhood Now That You're an Adult. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how to own your life, gain authenticity, and listen to your higher self. That, plus we'll talk about the power of at-one-ment, the dangers of subtexting, letting go of resentments, why the iPhone's your frenemy, Ricardo Muti and $2, the power of Zickle nails, and what in the world Vespa scooters have to do with anything.
Gotcha. Right. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the show, Ira. Are you ready to shine?
I am. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Michael.
Pleasure to have you here, and a mighty woohoo! So before we dive right into things, we were talking about it real briefly off air beforehand, but would you mind taking us back in time, actually before the accident? Can you take us back before 1985?
I feel as if I had a very normal middle-class upbringing in Stamford, Connecticut. I went to a public high school and played baseball. I don't think there was anything uncharacteristic about it.
Very good. And then how did things change on January 4th, 1985?
There was a car accident, and I was badly hurt. There's actually a week of my life that I don't recall. I've had glimpses into it, but I remember being in extreme pain. And so obviously the mind represses that.
And how did that start to change your life, or what were the next 2 years like?
Well, I set off on this journey, and I had to find the meaning of life. We probably shouldn't disclose that right now. We'll probably wait till the end. But for 25 years after that, there was an 8-year period where I was studying philosophy, because the questions, who am I? What am I doing on planet Earth? How can I be happier? I found addressed in philosophy. And then I was in Thailand in 94, and I got hurt, and a woman healed me with her hands, and that was kind of new and mystical and magical to me. So then I started studying. Well, actually, I went to Duke University and studied parapsychology. And then that set me off studying Buddhism, Hinduism, and Kabbalah, because the things that are considered beyond normal in our culture are considered to be normal within other cultures. So for 8 years, I studied Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga, meditation, things like that, spirituality, Eastern philosophy, I guess you would call it. And then I was in a relationship that raised my consciousness around, what is love, what is intimacy, things like that. And I started studying psychology for 8 years and became a psychotherapist, as well as a yoga teacher at the time. And I had gone to film school and just been studying for 25 years. So for me, the funny part, which may or may not be funny to your viewers, is that if you had looked at my life at any point in time, while all my peers were working on Wall Street in Manhattan, you would see, oh, Ira, he's living in Paris, sitting in cafes, reading Sartre, like he's lost, or oh, he's going to film school now, or he's studying Buddhism, or he's studying this. Like for those 25 years, it probably seemed to people around me that I was kind of just meandering, or didn't know what I was doing, or didn't have a focus. And then I was teaching yoga at Rodney Yee's studio in Oakland, and a woman came into my class. She put her hands down, and I watched her back open up, and a voice, I don't know where it came from, but it said, you have to teach. And so those 25 years of studying philosophy, psychology, spirituality, film, yoga, meditation, all the things converged. And so I've been on this path since 2009. I've made 5 DVDs. I've been teaching at Esalen and other places. And now, as of 3 days ago, this book came out.
Woo! So I like to look at the golden thread of people's lives and see how this all adds up. Now, looking in hindsight, you can see that all of these pieces mattered and were all the path.
100%.
And that's such a beautiful thing. In fact, it's kind of the story at the end of the book, but it seems appropriate here. 25 years after the accident, you went back and looked somebody up.
I had been seeking for 25 years, and there were some things that were very enlightening in my path, and then there were some blocks that I couldn't overcome. Sorry. And I went to a compassion workshop at Cal Berkeley, and Fred Luskin and Rick Hansen were teaching there. And I decided after that, I was inspired really to try on some new tools, and one of them was forgiveness. Yes, I looked up the driver of the car and had a very elongated discussion via Facebook with him. And at the end, I made a conscious decision to forgive him. And the interesting part about it is, there's such freedom there, but one you can't explain that to someone. Your unforgiveness is the root of your suffering because it creates resentments, woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. Your mind wants things that it can't change to be different. There was this adverse relationship I had with reality, having this scar on my face, and because when I speak or when I breathe or anything, there's discomfort. And as you know, with the Zickel nail apparatus or things on your leg, I have a scar on my leg this big. So every time I walk or run or do anything like that, there's pulling, there's discomfort. And so it's basically every step that I take or every breath that I breathe, there's some form of discomfort that many other people don't have. On the other hand, I can compare myself to the guy on the corner whose legs were amputated. So, it's a conscious choice of how we want to look at our life. Hamlet famously says to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So for me, language creates reality, and the way we choose to frame our own stories about our past, you can look at something as a terrible tragedy, or you can look at something as a learning experience, or you can diffuse it by forgiving and just saying this was an integral part of my growth, and I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't gone through every second of my life.
And that is, at least to me, speaking with the titanium in my legs, which I'm told someday will be a dowsing rod. I haven't seen that yet, but
I was told the same thing.
So have you found water that way yet?
I certainly have not, nor have I found gold.
Stay tuned and find out. But I think it shifted both of us. I don't think there's any way, but we all have these experiences
exactly
that shift us. Maybe we should go from there into what is radical acceptance.
I hope you just noticed this.
I've seen her for a bit. She was on the right side of the couch there, and she kind of came across.
This was going to happen. So I have these headphones on. She's going to push the plant off onto my new guitar in the background. I'm going to pull this back and break my neck, and this is going to be the greatest podcast ever. It'll end up on YouTube. It'll go viral. A young writer breaks his neck, and a cat sits there licking his face over a damaged guitar. Anyway,
so should we pause right now to save because she is sniffing on that plant?
She's going to push it right over onto the guitar. I know it. Go ahead.
All right, we're rolling. So this really gets into radical acceptance.
It does. Yeah, that's very funny. So, your mind was built to create resentment and prejudices, and it's wonderful because those are the things that help you survive your childhood and get your emotional and psychological needs met as children. So we know that they worked because we're here, which is great. On the other hand, those same prejudices and defense mechanisms are now possibly hindering us from being as vulnerable and as compassionate and loving as we need to be in order to enroll people in being as vulnerable and loving and compassionate with us. So I'm trying to raise consciousness around authenticity because there's a correlation with happiness. So everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to lead a good life. And for me, what I found is the thing that correlates most strongly with happiness is the quality of our intimate relationships, how we connect with people, how we attach to people, things like that. And the thing that correlates most strongly with intimacy for me is authenticity, really attuning to other people, being present, forgiving people, and all those things that I are attributes, I believe, of authenticity.
How would you define authenticity and what it means to be authentic?
Well, I've broken it down into 5 things: attachment, atonement or at-one-ment, attunement, presence, and congruence. So attachment is understanding that there are influences in our lives from the first 2 years that we were born, whether our parents held us or we were breastfed or we weren't. And it's just being able to understand that we develop patterns or dynamics that we either lean in, we think the world is a safe place. Someone comes up to us on the street and they ask for $5 and we're like, hey, can I help this person? Or when I reach into my wallet, are they going to assault me? Like you have basic things, a basic theory of whether the universe is abundant or scarce, and you should hoard things and be defensive. So attachment theory correlates to the way you interact with the world and people. And then there's atonement, or as you correctly pronounced it, at-one-ment. And for me, that's realizing our inner oneness, divinity, connectedness. There's a phrase by Suzuki Roshi I quote in the book: "You're perfect, and there's room for improvement." So there's a paradox in that there's a part of you that is magical, is a mystery. It's like you don't have to be here. It's a 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot that you're you, and you are you. So that's divine in some way. So the part that's imperfect, that could use some tweaking, is our egos. We're essentially, we are pure love. The babies are just pure love. They want to be loved. And then you grow up in this hyper-competitive, capitalistic culture, and you no longer think that all these people around you are your friends. You're in competition with them. You have to if they got an A, you have to get an A+, things like that. So
well, you're taught early on that it's all conditional.
Yes. So we're given tools. And so America to me is a giant resentment factory because we want to be loved unconditionally. And then we're only given tools to gain love conditionally because we learn how to use a fork and we don't cry at night. And then we get good grades in school and we make a lot of money and we do everything that society says is a measure of success. And unfortunately, what happens is we resent seducing all of these people around us into liking our false selves, our outer selves, and not loving the authentic inner selves that we didn't show them. So it's a trap, essentially. Psychologically, we really have to raise consciousness about the unwitting ramifications of our system of interacting. So there's attachment, atonement, then attunement, and that's being able to actually be with another person, but in this instance, in the same room, really. The phrase is in the book is mirror neurons don't fire via text message. So, and the other phrase is 1 hug equals 1,000,000 Facebook likes. Like we really need.
Oh, no.
We need connections. Like we need to break bread with people. We need someone to put their hand on our shoulder. We need just love, and it does not come in the form of a emoji on a screen. So we're deluding ourselves with all this technology into thinking we're connecting with people. But I think it's really engendering sadness and alienation because there's this weird competition. On your Instagram page, you have 2,000 followers and one of your peers has 4,000, and you feel that makes you feel bad in some bizarre way for I don't even know what reason. So anyways, attachment, atonement, attunement, then presence is basically meditation, meaning being able to listen to the prejudices of the past and not
Mhm.
feed into them, and also the fears and your expectations about the future. The past doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is your story about it, and the future doesn't yet exist. So learning how to just be here in the present moment, as we'll do at the end of this podcast, that's really important. And then congruence. So we're living in an incredibly luxurious, privileged time of humanity where, irrespective of the gruesomeness of the news every morning when we wake up, we're super privileged. We have the longest lifespans. We have incredible freedom, and yet 20 million people in America take antidepressants every day. So for me, congruence is deciding who you want to be
Mhm.
and deciding the life you want to live, and then using tools to be that person and to create a life that is going to bring you happiness, or have tools to keep you at the high end of your happiness spectrum.
Beautiful. And I'm going to want to dive into a few of these because I think it can really help people today. First off, maybe you can tell us about Mary Ainsworth and the strange situation experiments.
So John Bowlby started. He was a British psychiatrist in the 1950s. He created something called attachment theory. He found that babies were distressed when taken away from their mothers. Go
Mhm.
figure. I'll just jump into that now. So, most. Let me think of how to say this. Before the Industrial Revolution, most children slept with their mothers until 4 or 5, and they
Yeah.
breastfed. So until like 4 or 5. So we're the only mammals who drink the milk of another mammal. And as Robert Putnam talks about in his book Bowling Alone, one of the trophies of capitalism is that all the kids have their own rooms, right? Like you have a big house and your kid does not sleep like under you. It's like a sign of success that your child has its own room. So we have to understand that science says you breastfeed for this amount of time. Or I was born in '66 and I wasn't breastfed at all. Nobody I know who was born in '66 was breastfed because the doctors went to our parents and said chemical formula is superior to mother's milk. And for whatever reason, our parents all listened. It sounded good to them, So John Bowlby created something called attachment theory, and then Mary Ainsworth did these experiments with babies called the strange situation that have been replicated thousands of times on YouTube. And what she found was she would take a mom and a baby into a room, and then the mom would leave. And then the baby would either freak out because, it thought, oh my God, like, where am I? There's no protection. There's no
Mhm.
food. What's going on? Or the baby had an understanding that the mom wouldn't put it into harm's way. Like there was something conveyed psychically because the babies were pre-verbal, and the baby just thought, okay, mom's gone, not a big deal, right? So that was essentially secure attachment, and meant that when the mom came back into the room, the baby would reattach securely, and there was limited fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of impending doom. So supposedly that's about 33% of babies. Now, what's interesting is the ways babies insecurely attach,
Mhm.
because when the mom would come back into the room, sometimes the kids would be ambivalent, kind of like, oh, I don't know, right? And then the third type was called avoidance. So the baby would be sitting there, the mom would come back into the room, and the baby would be like, F you, you left me and it hurt. And I know if I reattach, I'll just get abandoned again. So I'm just going to avoid. So that's
Mhm.
called avoidant. And then the fourth type, which was added later, which is called disorganized attachment. So I sat with Sue Johnson, who's brilliant and wrote Hold Me Tight. And she thought, I believe, that actually ambivalent reattachment manifested later in life as depression, anxiety, things like that. But for me, what I see in babies that reattach in a disorganized manner, I feel like that correlates strongly to borderline personality 35 years later. So, people are doing longitudinal studies about these things, and I think we're going to find a lot of interesting information out in the coming years.
And it sounds like it's important to try to understand our own patterns and go back there. We can't obviously go back to our childhood, but if we get those patterns, it can help us to release that now.
100%, right. We can make more educated decisions on, if we just have total intolerance and everything seems to us like a red flag, then once we learn that we're avoidant, we can say, you know what, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to see what happens on this time. Now that I'm 50 years old and, I've experienced these particular patterns in relationships for the past 30 years, I want to change something. So again, that's the whole gist of my classes and this book is just, Abraham Maslow famously says, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem resembles a nail. So all I'm trying to do is enlarge in people's toolboxes. So the first step is raising consciousness around the way we are influenced subconsciously, and that's what the purpose of therapy is about. And then reframing things using different language.
Thank you. And part of that recognition and reframing is that inner critical voice that we didn't have before we were gifted with it.
That's an interesting way of phrasing it. So the way I see it is, so there's an epidemic in our country of low self-esteem and negative self-talk. And when patients come into the office and they say, "Oh, I suck at this, and this doesn't work out," and blah blah blah, I say, "Whose voice is that? Were you born with that voice?" And the answer is obviously no. No baby was born with that voice. There's a phrase by Jacques Lacan. He says, "Language thinks me." And then Wittgenstein talks about language being a cage, language being a trap. So for me, all of those negative voices come because, and I'm going to be a little bit provocative here, we raise children in our culture the same way we tame pets. And the languaging is negative. Don't stick your tongue in a socket. Don't run out into the street. Don't jab your sister with a fork. Don't. And then you look 35 years later, and these people just have these negative voices in their head, these critical voices. And we have to find a new way of, basically the goal of our school system is to make people into productive members of society, which is just some sort of, again, I'm not a socialist, but if you look at it, our school system, it's the same as our voting system. Both are 250, 300 years old. And, the Chad system was fantastic, around the Civil War time. But nowadays, we should all be voting by our phones. And that's how we'll know we live in a true democracy. The same thing with our school system. Our school system was designed to make factory workers. And it's basically a one-size-fits-all program. So we have to evolve into the next economy, the next way of interacting with people, and I think that's going to open up amazing opportunities.
Woohoo! So let's go from the inner critic and let's go to resentment. And maybe we can even talk about what I'm going to call the original resentment. Arthur Janov learning about babies crying themselves out.
Oof. Yeah, so that's really fascinating. So Janov thought that the first time you put a baby down, and so you have this consciousness and this language, and you say, as I said about Robert Putnam, you're like, "We'll be back." Like the baby is in your arms. It thinks, it has no self. Essentially, that's the main thesis. There's no when a baby looks in a mirror, or I'm so sorry, when you hold the baby up to a mirror, it can't see itself. That's what the Stade du Miroir essay is about by Lacan. And so there's an individuation process during which the baby gains, I am Ira. I am not a part of this, system with Ira's mom. I'm a separate entity. So in our culture, I make a joke. I don't know how palatable it'll be, but our parents had a Nietzschean what doesn't kill it makes it stronger attitude of child rearing, and they let the babies cry themselves out a lot of times. I mean, and I'm not saying, if you have a colicky baby, you have to sit there for, 14 hours while it cries itself out, because I know that is very stressful. But there's some way where what we're doing in our culture really has negative ramifications, is what I'm saying. As I said, if you go to 12-step meeting programs, you'll hear this plethora of negative self-talk and resentments, and the book is designed to help people clean things up and own their past. So to answer your question, the first time, according to Yanov, this is very provocative, he says the first time you put a baby down, the baby thinks, "You're killing me." So that's the primal abandonment or core betrayal wound. And if that happened to us, we all have that. So when you were fired from your job or your wife cheats on you 40 years later, what's happening is really a reopening of that primal abandonment wound. And that's why, again, being present in the moment and understanding your prejudices will help you deal with those ebbs and flows of adulthood much better. You could be like, "Oh, I got fired." Okay, instead of becoming dysregulated, going on a drinking binge, running naked down the street, whatever people do to express their displeasure with being fired, there might be undue influence from something that happened 30 or 40 years ago.
Thank you. So on that note, there's also, along with betrayal, there can be resentment.
Right.
What are our resentments? Why is it so important that we get to the root of this?
Well, resentments are when you want anything in the past to be different, right? If you want anything in reality to be different, that's a resentment. So from French, ressentiment is, again, sentiment is sentiment, feeling. So you're feeling things about stuff that's dead and gone. That thing that happened to you 2 years ago or 50 years ago, it's gone, right? The only thing that exists is your story about it. And unfortunately, the way our minds operate, those stories put judgments in there. That shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. Anytime you hear the word should or shouldn't have, that's a resentment. When you want something to be different that you can't change. So in the book, I say, if your friend was sitting on the couch trying to shove a square peg into a round hole, like what would you do? You go over and stop them. And yet that's what your mind does all day long. It sits there trying to shove square pegs into round holes. It wants things to be different that you can't change. And that, to me, is what insanity is. When you're if you change the things that you can, and you accept the things that you can't change. Like it's like you should be like a little fortune cookie. It should be every fortune cookie, really. You just go to a restaurant and they give you a fortune cookie. Change the things you can and accept the things you can't. That should be every fortune cookie.
Suffering be gone.
Right.
So on that note, we need to, and you had mentioned this earlier, and so it's a perfect time to dive into this. We need to start to become observant, aware of our thoughts, present.
Right. And the other aspect that I don't know how apt it is to quote Lily Tomlin, but she says, forgiveness means giving up all hope of having a better past. So that's it. Again, that's what we're trying to do. We're enraged in some weird way about the way things transpired. So our mind either tries to, it does this spiteful thing, like, I'll show them, they shouldn't have bullied me in the schoolyard. I'll become the head of a movie studio, and then everyone will respect me. So there's a lot of odd things that we consider to be normal that take place in our society, and we really have to reframe or have a new understanding of what makes people happy, and get them off the crazy hamster wheels of resentment, spite, betrayal, the things that motivate people for the next economy, the next society that we need. We're going to have to create after our crashes.
And that means that we have to address one of the most important forgiveness, the one that's taboo, that we're taught that you can't forgive. yourself.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, that feeds into the negative self-talk, low self-esteem, and it's really difficult to be a perfect parent. Like be perfectly balanced to create. What you're trying to do is instill discipline. So for me, discipline correlates with self-esteem. So having practices, making commitments to, for me, it's meditation, yoga, eating correctly, things like that. Those practices really, when I sit every morning, even for a few minutes, there's a sense of accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this feeds into the last part of authenticity, which is congruence, like deciding consciously who you know you should be, and then being that person rather than being a hypocrite, phony, and liar. So, yeah, that's the forgiveness of self is really integral, and that's a process that we all have to go through.
So thank you for sharing on that. In fact, I want to come back to what you just said here. That's so powerful, and I want you to break out what the D word means. Discipline correlates with self-esteem. You're
Correct.
not meaning discipline by getting corrected. Tell us about the discipline you mean.
No, it's self-discipline. It's meaning like for me, let's say, and this feeds into the chapter on remissions. Like we have this crazy thing in America where, like, I believe we heard that French people live longer and they drink 1 glass of wine a day. So when we sit down as Americans, and maybe people are going to hate me for saying this, but we sit down as Americans and we have 1 glass a day, and something goes off in our minds and says, well, if 1 glass a day is good, 2 glasses must be better. And so then we get drunk and we live shorter lives because we're abusing our bodies. So we have to consciously find the tools that keep us at the higher end of our happiness spectrums.
Mm-hmm.
And then when those seductions come in, so in the book I say there's always a choice between like ego gratification on one shoulder, the devil, let's say, and then love on the other shoulder. So what happens is, you're having a bad day, something goes a little bit awry that you didn't expect, and then finally there's that voice in your head that says, it, I'll just have 2 shots of tequila before dinner, or, it, I'll just take 2 Paxil, it, I'll just do this. And what I'm counseling people to do is look at the long term, understand that there's going to be some negative things that happen, and make healthy long-term decisions about your life that include, being sufficiently disciplined not to listen to that voice in your head that says, go get drunk, go do this, go do that.
Thank you. How do we start to own our lives? Maybe actually before we even do that, what's the importance of saying that our parents did the best they could?
Because you can't change anything about your past. So if any complaining about it is a resentment, and the resentments manifest today as your own suffering. You're only causing your own suffering when you do not own every moment of your life, which includes the way your parents chose to raise you. There's a paradox there, though, because if your parents say we did the best we could, that actually invalidates your emotional experience. So this is a really interesting, like the perfect thing for psychological healing is for a parent, and they usually do this on their deathbed, which is, to me, a day late and a dollar short. But if at some point in time, if parents want to help their children after college when they're adults, they should just turn to them and hold them and say, we could have done better. We could have loved you more. Like, we know that the way we disciplined you, or the way we chose to coddle you, and that lack of structure, because that we're seeing both things in our society now. I don't know if it's where you live, but around here, I feel as if a lot of parents my age, I'm 51, have like 20-year-old kids. And there's a thing in their head where they kind of hate the way that they were raised because their parents were oppressive. And this goes back to Alice Miller's drama of The Gifted Child. Like, we were objectified. There was that phrase, Children are made to be seen, not heard. Don't cry, don't do this, things like that. So there's a wave of parents my age who are like, the kids come like, I want to smoke marijuana, and the parents are like, sure, I got some right here, right? And so they smoke marijuana with their kids, and they're just like, they're too laissez-faire in some ways. So the kids subconsciously interpret that as, my parents don't give about me. Like I can do anything I want. I can stay out all night. I can do this. So what I'm saying is that instilling the self-discipline requires a framework. So getting back to your question, at some point in time, the parents should just turn to their 25 or 30-year-old child and say, we could have loved you more, or something to that effect, instead of being the disciplinarians in some ways. On the other hand, the kids should turn to their parents and say, I know you did the best you could, because we can't go back and change anything, and that was the best that they could. You're always going to think that your parents had insufficient tools, or not the sharpest tools, or there could have been ways where you didn't feel that betrayal, abandonment, uselessness, or something that your parents inadvertently made you feel, inadvertently. So there's not a lot of psychopathic parents, right? Like, the parents don't go out of their way to be, they're doing the best they could. They just have poor tools.
Makes sense. So let's talk. We could talk years about this. Since we only have a few minutes, we'll talk very briefly on it. In Chapter 8, you talk about the Buddhist Eightfold path. And I wonder if we can touch on just a couple of
Please.
the eight. First off, the importance of compassion.
His Holiness says, my religion is compassion. So I make a joke and I say, you can't teach anyone past the age of 10 years old anything, but you can inspire them. So for me, the whole premise of Mahayana Buddhism is that this project of humanity will not be realized until all sentient beings become enlightened. And the only way we can do that is to inspire everyone to be as compassionate as possible. And that will bring on whatever is the next iteration of humanity and planet Earth, or this universe, or whatever. So that's the philosophical underpinning of being compassion. But we know, also, if you want to live a happy life and shed those resentments, you have to be as compassionate as possible to everyone.
Woohoo! Tell us about presence, mindfulness, or what you call Buddhism light.
Buddhism light. So there's a wave in our country, and we do this thing where we secularize everything. What we did, what Domino's did to pizza, Starbucks did to coffee. That's what we've done to yoga and meditation in our culture. So I take a lot of meditation classes and yoga classes, and quite often I'm horrified, because what the teachers do in their ignorance is they conflate Buddhism and Hinduism. So they're essentially disrespectful to 2 billion people, and in their ignorance, they don't know it, because they're talking about mindfulness, which is a Buddhist practice, and then they're talking about something about like transcending Maya or something, which is a Hindu concept. So, I mean, for me, again, we Americans just appropriate, I'll use, various practices. And I really think that understanding the larger paradigm is essential. So what I teach 7 different types of meditation, and I'll specifically say, like, this is for theists. This is a Hindu practice that helps you transcend Maya, which is everything that you perceive through your 5 senses, and that your brain chunks together, that your mind chunks together, and then I'll say, this is a Buddhist practice. This is a mindfulness practice, because Buddha was a Hindu the way Jesus was a Jew, and after his search, he found that there was no self to transcend,
Mm-hmm.
and that there was no divine to transcend to. So the Buddhist lineage is essentially, from my understanding, atheistic, and which is fantastic. So if someone goes in for transcendental meditation, they have they want to essentially transcend their consciousness so that they could realize, réaliser.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a great word in English. Become one with God or their inner divinity. So that's a Hindu practice. And then most of the Buddhist practices are atheistic. So for me, we chunk everything as Buddhism light. Like most Americans think everything's Zen, and Zen is 1% of Buddhism. So we and most Buddhists don't meditate. Like, we just have misconceptions because we appropriate things that we think will make us feel good. And for me, it's more interesting to look at the larger picture of why are people stressed out
Mm-hmm.
than to say, oh, sit there and concentrate on your breath, and then I'll do a body scan, which is Buddhist, and then I'll do a mantra meditation, which is Hindu. I mean, when you go to these meditation studios here, they just throw in the kitchen sink. These kids today, just like they just sit there, and for me, half the time I'm just sitting there like, when are you going to shut up and let me meditate?
So, and we'll do a brief guided meditation in just a few minutes. First off, I want to take off my coaching hat.
Mm-hmm.
I want to put it on you right now, and I don't want people leaving here without a homework assignment to do. What one homework assignment would you give people today on their path?
So I was teaching in Boston 4 or 5 years ago, and I was talking about how we really don't know the influence that we have on other people, and we crash into people, whether it's in Whole Foods or at yoga, and we do these like, hi, wait, like whatever, oh, how are you? I'm crazy busy, like, and those interactions to me are not as loving as they could be. So I tell this story where I was teaching in Boston years ago, and a gentleman came up and recounted the story. He was a alcoholism addiction counselor, and he said that he had received a phone call from a young man who wanted to take him out to lunch and thank him for saving his life. So he goes out to lunch with this guy, and the guy tells him, what's been going on in the past 20 years since he saved his life and all these things. And the older gentleman turns to him and he says, I'm so sorry, but I actually don't recall, who you are, what happened 20 years ago. Can you tell me? And he said, well, 20 years ago, when I was at my lowest low, I went into a meeting and you put your hand on my shoulder and said, you're going to be all right. So, we don't know the force of our own interactions with other human beings. So for me, stop. That's the advice. Slow down, people. Even when you're in the grocery store or whatever you're doing, just choose love, choose compassion, and try to really be present for that other human being. You don't know what they're going through. You don't, whatever assumptions you have are probably inaccurate, and you really could save their life, and they could save yours. So for me, when I'm meeting new people, sometimes I'll just want to meet somebody, which is a little crazy. I'll send an email to someone who I don't know, and I'll say let's have coffee, no agenda. And I don't
Cool.
Sometimes, I mean, I did that with this musician, Chris Brown, from Canada. I heard one of his songs. I said, oh, I heard one of your songs. And then we became friends, and he came to Esalen a year later, and we ended up playing the song I had heard a year earlier on stage together. So you don't know what magic, when you just go out there and be vulnerable and be authentic, there's things that happen that really will shock you. For me, I'll just tell you, because you probably saw the accolades on the book, and And it was a really interesting process to see where I had culled favor from people over the past 30 years.
And for people who haven't seen this, the list of accolades is dumbfounding. And I've had many a book and author on the show, and it goes on and on and on and on with some very special people.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that was the most touching thing. I would be like, I'd be in line at the store, and like Marianne Williamson would call. So sorry. It was like so touching, but there was just this thing that happened where I realized that the way I had been showing up for certain people, and a lot of egotistical or ego-based people basically voted themselves off the island. Like I went to some people in my community who are yoga teachers mostly in this area, and I said, hey, I've written a book, I'd really love a blurb. And the yoga teachers in Santa Monica, they basically ghosted me. They were like, they're too busy, they're crazy busy, they're doing whatever they're doing. And then all of a sudden, you get Reverend Michael, Sting, and all these really lovely human beings. And some of them were so, they really went out of their way to take the time to read the book and then write really loving and positive things. So I've been totally blown away by the response I've received. It's been really so lovely to just. These are some of my idols, right? And they're doing wonderful things. And then just to have them, I've been corresponding with various people over the years, and I go to their conferences and I ask questions, and with some of them, I say, let's get coffee, no agenda, and things like that. And so I've had really honest interactions with these people, and they all showed up for me. So that was really loving.
Woohoo!
Thank
Speaks to your authenticity. Real quickly, what advice? Jessica, my wife, she's the producer. She always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. What advice would you give to parents today?
Well, there's really wonderful books on conscious parenting, and we're seeing an evolution. And, parents get frustrated very easily because they're trying to raise children, which is, I think, the most difficult thing in the world. So, again, it's just choosing love and, knowing that, again, this probably goes back to the self-forgiveness, because there's no such thing as the perfect parent. You're trying to instill self-discipline, and it's like a dance. There's not a rule book where at 3 years old do this, at 4 years old do that. So it's really learning how to dance with your child and tune into him. And the one piece of advice is, there were generations of people, and I know we don't have time to get in this, but through their languaging, they inadvertently invalidated the emotional experiences of their children. So what I would say is everyone has their right to whatever their emotional experience is, and making them feel heard and making them feel like they're not crazy, like what the voices in their head are not totally just insane, is probably the key to self-acceptance. And then that person who accepts him or herself will show up in a more loving manner.
Thank you. Where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful book?
www.iraisrael.com has a lot of free videos. I taped How to Get the Love You Want and some of my happiness lectures. So you can go to various links via www.iraisrael.com for the book. For my 5 DVDs are available on Amazon Prime for free, and then there's a slew of videos and podcasts and things.
Fantastic. Any last words of wisdom?
Having a sense of wonder about the world and understanding that the jadedness and the prejudices that our minds create, and that our minds are trying to protect us, so it looks for red flags, and to try to invert that in some way, any way possible, and really just go to a symphony, go to a museum. I mean, the world is an astonishing, amazing place full of amazing human beings, and we've done such wonderful things. And yet, if you read the news every morning and find out the atrocities that people have inflicted on each other in the past 24 hours, then, basically you'll lock yourself in your home, shut down, and buy a gun and just wait for the terrible thing to happen. So it's about reframing your life in order to be open to all of the grace, abundance, and love that's out there.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Ira, for being on the show. This has been fantastic. There is so much great information that you put in this book, and it's really, to me, it's a wake-up call to go inside, to look at our lives, to look at the big picture, and then look at the choices we're making in our minds, moment to moment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get How to Survive Childhood now that you're an adult, and begin owning your life today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Ira.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!